Welcome to the Cherish and Conquer podcast, the show dedicated to celebrating female entrepreneurs' strength, resilience, and innovation. Be inspired by stories of women and what they cherish to help them conquer against all odds. Every other week, you will learn from remarkable women on how they navigate challenges, uphold their values, and create sustainable success. And now, here's your host, Jim Rembach.
Hey, welcome everybody to the Cherish and Conquer podcast. I'm looking forward to our discussion today. We have Stephanie Coradin on the show with us. Stephanie, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim, for having me.
Now, we had the opportunity to chat a little bit before we started recording and laid out, some of the things that we wanted to talk about today. And there was some alignment, between you and I in regards to being able to incorporate what we do and who we are into how we are impacting the lives of others. So if you could just share a little bit about how the work that you're doing is actually impacting the lives of others and how you're incorporating you into all of that.
Sure. So my work impacts the life of others because I go into companies and help them merge the gap between leadership and their team members. I believe when team members are happy, everything else flows. And that's how my work impacts them. That's how I impact people with my mental wellness work and my helping people reach their emotional leadership inside them and bring it out and operate from a place of leadership, of self-leadership.
Well, you also have a unique pedigree in this, in that you have your MBA,
Yes.
but then you also have
My master's
degree
in mental health counseling.
That's right,
Yes.
in mental health counseling.
Yes.
Even when we start talking about in the most recent past of COVID, post-COVID, and we hear all of these statistics and stories of so many different things of people struggling in a lot of different ways. I would suspect that combination, oh my gosh, that's almost priceless in many ways.
Yes.
Lean into that.
Yes, it's definitely helped post-COVID. It did help before, but now I have team members coming to me with things that they've never come to me before, in ways that, and I'm able to help in ways that I didn't have to help before. I don't do counseling, but I do therapeutic coaching with people, right? I help them understand what's going on and how they can move forward from where they are, as opposed to going into their past and bringing it in. But the main thing there as well, Jim, is that I'm able to link that to what they're doing for work, right? What is holding them back and how we can help them move forward. And that's what inspires me, really. Getting them to go from where they were into linking it to their day-to-day without having to change what they can't control, right? Just changing themselves from within.
Okay, so you talked about that gives you some passion and fuels you. But when you started your business, well over a decade ago, if not a few decades ago, what inspired you to start your own business, and how does that align with the concept of cherish and conquer?
Sure. So I, in my last corporate job, I was a director of learning and development, right? And when I started in that role, I found that I got bored with, the cookie cutter training, and I felt like I wasn't giving enough. So with my mental health degree, I started to pull out from counseling and into putting it into corporate and finding ways to expand training into a way that people really fully understood what they were doing, as opposed to just doing what was told of them, right? And that's where my business started to unfold. So when I decided that I wanted to go off on my own, for various reasons, my kids were small, and I wanted to be more present for my parents that were growing, and so on and so forth. I I pulled out of that passion to, go out and do my own thing. But the one thing that I can say that fueled this particular business is fully understanding that in corporate, there was that gap between executives, leaders, and who they were working with, where they weren't really communicating. There was no relationship. Studies upon studies show that a lot of times that the team members don't even trust their managers really. And that's the gap that I really wanted to fill. And that's what, brought me into this business. And it links to Cherish and Conquer in so many ways, especially for me as a mom and for other moms, right? Where when you're happy at work, like you bring everything home, whether you want to or not, right? So when you're happy at work, when you're in an environment that's more conducive to your well-being, you go home and you're able to be present for your children. You're able to be present for your family and as a whole, whether or not you're a mom, right? Your friends even. So that's what makes me happy, really.
I have to chuckle when you say that, and especially that part. I mean, my wife and I have been married over 30 years, and
Mhm.
so when she used to go to the office every day,
Uh-huh.
and I've been working remote for oh my gosh, over 20 years.
Isn't it
Uh,
awesome?
yeah, but and it's interesting, but when COVID happened, she came home, and
Hmm.
so what you were talking about right there in regards to that separation piece, it
Yeah.
no longer existed even for us in our own house.
Yeah.
And so I was getting all of the frustration that I normally wouldn't get because that was what her release was on her drive home, right? So
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
it's like that was a big shocker for me. Uh,
Right.
and then she finally, came out and said, she goes, the transition to all this COVID and going home, she goes, you already were home. It's easy for you. She goes, but
Exactly.
for me and the kids, she goes, this is, a whole, different thing that we're experiencing right
Hmm.
now. I'm like, I'm sorry, I
Can't help you.
can't relate.
That was me.
Yeah. It's like, so it's interesting how, all that works in different perspectives
Hmm.
and how that also, like what you're talking about, leads into, and I think I'd like to dive in just a little bit more in what you said about, well, I don't counsel, but I do some coaching. So
Hmm.
you gave it actually a specific name and a phrase. So
Therapeutic coaching.
therapeutic coaching. Help us
Mhm.
understand the difference between counseling and therapeutic coaching.
Yeah, sure. So counseling, the counselor digs deep into your past, into trauma that you've had, and how it relates to what you may going through today. As a coach, I do not go into your trauma. I do not go into your past only as it relates to what we're doing, right? I may go into your past, but only as it relates to what we're going to do now. What we do as coaches, we're supposed to focus on your goals now and help you move forward. So we're not supposed to dig into your trauma. We're not supposed to dig into your past and relate it. If we realize as a coach that there is trauma that's causing your stuckness, there is trauma that's causing where you are. Technically, and I say technically because it doesn't always happen with some coaches, but technically, we're supposed to refer you to a counselor who is licensed and qualified to deal with trauma. And
That's
that's the
very,
difference.
yeah, that's very helpful and
Hmm.
insightful. And I would dare to say that for many of us, especially if we're in a leader role, we
Hmm.
are that therapeutic coach. It
Yes.
just depends on our, first of all, our skill level, our
Mm.
background, and all those things, and our own experiences.
Yes.
But then we don't know the line, and
Yes.
we may cross the line.
A lot of times it happens. Yes.
So what's the risk in crossing the line when you don't have, that background and that skill set with you to know
Yes.
when to say, hey, I need to refer you at this point?
Great question. So the risk of crossing the line is risking to further injure that person or traumatize that person without you doing that on purpose or without even knowing that you're doing it. And sometimes even the person doesn't realize that they're further being traumatized because they are being treated, quote unquote, by somebody who is not skilled and experienced to do it. Depending on what the person went through and the trauma that they've been through, there are different skill sets to help them move past that. And if we don't know what we don't know, we can't really help them. And so we can further traumatize them, further harm them. And so it's best if you're not sure to, err on the line of let me refer you or let me find you somebody who can figure it out.
Well, that's a very um, potentially hazardous situation to get into when we're talking about if it's affecting work performance.
Yes. Yes.
And then therefore, you look at, you're saying, probably a good idea for you to go and seek counsel,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't do it, and it's still impacting their work.
Yes. Yes. So here's the thing with that, and what I've seen is, so when you say it's probably a good idea to seek counsel, if it's a small business where you don't have a big HR department and you're it, this is where you have to make it a point where, hey, I can't force you to seek counsel, but here is an action plan with what I can tell you to do or can help you with, and here's what I can't help you with. At least if you're doing what I can help you with, maybe we will see some difference. It might not be 100%, but at least we'll see some difference. And once the person starts going on that path, then they themselves may realize that this is the logical next step, which is to seek counsel. But if it's a bigger company where there is a HR department, it's best to refer that person to employee relations. They are better equipped to help that person move from one step to the next. I would say refer that person to employee relations. Make it a point for everybody to know that this is what's happening and they may need help, so that you have it documented and so on and so forth. At some point, sometimes it is, unfortunately, you have to terminate that team member. You have to let them go because they're not following instructions. They're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and it's affecting productivity. So at one point, if they're not going to help themselves, then the business becomes at risk. So unfortunately, it does happen.
And it does seem like that's almost like the critical element there, is whether or not they're
Mhm.
motivated to be able to, seek their own assisted
Yes.
support, whether it's through organizations like, EAP, Employee
Hmm.
Assistance Programmers, or something
Uh-huh.
along those lines. And so I think that's very helpful insight for all of us who, I think in today's world, have become a de facto coach.
Yes. Yes.
We need to know the limits.
Want more insights from female entrepreneurs? Get complimentary access to Marina's Army for additional tips, tools, and tactics from this episode. Just go to Mirina.ai and click Community for access. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
Okay,
Mhm.
so good. Let's change gears a little bit.
Mhm.
I'd really love to know when you had a situation where and you can also share some key
Mhm.
lessons on when you've learned, how to, or share a story on how embracing female qualities or strengths helped you to overcome a challenge in your business.
Sure. So when I first started my business, obviously, like everybody else, it's, I was bootstrapping. I actually started part-time and I was working my full-time job. And my motherly, nurturely, I know I always go back to the mother, but as a mom, it you know, identifies me pretty much. So me being a nurturer and um, a mother per se helped me grow my business in the sense that when I needed help, when I needed to hire people, it was a great quality to have. And now these days, I even help train people to show you how, when you're when you're onboarding, to do the same. But going back to my story, I had this one person come on, and they, like we were talking about just now, seemed to have some productivity issues. They didn't fully understand what they were hired on to do. And I kind of blamed myself a little bit. I thought I wasn't being clear enough in my job description or when I interviewed them. But at the end of the day, I realized that it was just a little bit more hand holding, right? They needed some more hand holding. They needed some nurturing, some tender love and care, as you put it. But basically, how that helped me grow is understanding that putting a little bit more nurturing into my business, kind of like watering my business, and then also showing leaders how to do the same for their team members, has been a big one for me. And I think as a mother, most of us have that quality.
It's kind of interesting. In my youth,
Hmm.
I had the opportunity, as far as my team and the people that reported to me, they were all female,
Hmm.
and most of them were mothers.
Hmm.
And one of them replied back to me when we were having a discussion about, not being a parent and not getting it. And in my youth, I was like, I think I can understand. And then we had 3 kids,
Uh-huh.
I'm like, how naive I was.
Right. Right. You
You
thought you
don't know
understood.
until you're there. You don't know until you're in it.
Yeah, you don't know what you don't know. That's what I like to tell people.
So true, so true. Okay,
Mhm,
so what are some key lessons you learned about self-love and
mhm,
impact, and how has that impacted your journey as an entrepreneur? Because you talked about mom, and then you talked about aging parents,
mhm.
all of those
So
things. It
one,
leads you to hold on, all those things.
uh-huh,
This is a really important point, and
uh-huh.
because I see my wife even doing as well, is that you take on more and more and more and more, and think, you know what, you haven't taken on enough. So
Yes.
how have you been able to manage that?
Yes. So that was a great question because that was going to be the first place I go. One of the things that I had to learn to do is to learn how to say no to my kids, to my husband, just learn to my team members to learn how to say no, just because it got to a point where I was just going nonstop. It like I would be on supposed vacation and I'm on my phone doing work and, checking in. So one of the things that I had to learn for self-love was to learn how to say no. And it's the hardest thing that we can do when we're one of those people who always is ready to take on and always feeling like we're not taking on enough, right? And the way I had to do that is to just let the guilt sink in. Like I would say no and I would feel guilty and I would be okay with just feeling guilty for a little while until it got easier. And it's still not 100% like, oh no, I'm not doing that. And then I move on. It's not that, but it's way better than how it used to be. So that's one of the ways that I would say if you're struggling with taking on or overwhelm is to create some boundaries around what needs to be done by you as opposed to what somebody else can do. And that's not just for entrepreneurs, it's for people at home too. Like if you have a 14-year-old daughter, maybe she could start learning how to do her own laundry or, those little things, right? So, and by the way, I have a 14-year-old daughter. But it's just those things that somebody else like learn how to delegate, learn how to, give other people a chance to help you because sometimes they're here and willing to help. We're just not asking for the help, right? So it's bottom line is ask for help.
You know, as you're saying that, it
Mhm,
seems to me like the barrier and the hump to get over on all of that is what you were alluding to in regards to you had to make that internal decision. So,
mhm,
of course, for me, and my wife, I want to fix that problem for her, and
mhm,
she don't want to have any part of that. She don't want to hear it, and it irritates her when I even start talking about trying to solve her problem, right?
mhm,
Um, so, how did you, and how do you, share with people how they can get to the point of getting over that particular hump? It's like, okay, you need to do this.
mhm.
Now, let's get over it.
Yep. So it's a simple tip that I give people, but I tell people to journal, not in the morning, but at night, at the end of your day when you're super tired, give yourself like 5 minutes and do a brain dump and then read that journal. Like, don't think about what you're writing, just write out everything that comes to mind and then read it. And then you will see how much you're taking on that's unnecessary things. It's or talk to somebody like if you're not comfortable journaling, maybe you can have like, and I'm not even saying a coach or anything, maybe it's a best friend, maybe it's a family member that you trust, just talk to somebody, but talk, like really let it out. You'll see, because sometimes we're not really aware of everything that's up there in our mind or everything that we're doing because we're on autopilot, we're just going, right? We're not really aware, but giving yourself that 5 minutes of self-awareness can be a great shift in how you're thinking and how you're seeing things. So for me, that shift came, and it had unfortunately was a traumatic event for me. My dad got sick and I had to take care of him, and so um, it put everything in perspective where I needed to help myself because my dad was diabetic, and his parents were diabetic, and I'm like, okay, so I need to do something to where I'm not, because it's hereditary. So that was one of the things, and then I realized, I've been taking on all this stuff, and I had to drop these things when my dad got sick. So there was a bunch of balls that were just dropped. But if I was having help, then those balls wouldn't have gotten out. So it was a traumatic event, but it doesn't have to be a traumatic event. It could be you just being more self-aware. So what I say is sometimes pay attention to your thoughts. Like, give 2 minutes every few hours. Just take 2 minutes and just listen to what you're thinking, not what you're doing or what you're saying. Just listen to what you're thinking, and you'll realize how overwhelmed your brain is, because it'll go from, God, what should I cook today, to, oh my God, what's going to happen 10 years down the road. And that's an exaggeration, but you never know what's in people's brains, right? So
Right.
just take a minute to be more aware of yourself. And that causes the shift a lot of times.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, when you start talking about, journal, and
Hmm.
then you said, talk to somebody, I'd say make sure you don't talk to somebody who's a fixer.
Yeah, yeah, definitely somebody who's trying to help you fix it. And that's something that that's another thing that I teach, like even leaders. I say, when you're going to offer some advice, or when you're going to give a suggestion, ask the person if they're ready for that, or if they even want it, or if they're even open to it. So that's another tip too.
Yeah, I mean,
Mhm.
that's such an important point, especially,
Mhm.
for somebody who, I hate to see people in pain, right?
Yeah,
So it's like, but you know what? They didn't ask for my help. They didn't,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that has to happen. That internal, switch has to occur.
Hmm.
Being more aware of, when they may be open for that.
Yeah.
Um, so that's very helpful. Okay, so I would love to know what your advice would be for women when it comes to business relationships and networking, and what you've been able to do, and what advice, and that you received that actually impacted you in those particular areas.
Sure. So I would say the first advice that I received, and it was a while ago, and it was from a man actually, was to walk in the room like you own it. And that's something that us women, we tend to not do at first, until we start getting comfortable, right? And what that did for me is, before I would go into the room and I would wait for people to come to me, right? But now I actually go and I introduce myself. I ask the questions. I show up for myself, pretty much. Not even, and I'm not even going to say for my business. I show up for myself as myself. And the other thought that I got from one of my coaches is that I am the brand. Like, I can show them my business, I can show my logo, but me as the person, I'm a coach. I'm selling my knowledge. It's not like I have this product that I can be like, here, this is, what I'm selling. So I have to show up as that. I have to show up as the brand. So showing up confidently, knowledgeably, knowing where you're going, even if it takes an extra 10 minutes or 15 minutes to do a little bit more research to understand who's going to be in that room. It's a great feeling to, because you feel armed and ready, pretty much is what I'm saying. So those are my tips. And also, don't waste time. Like, don't just go to any networking event just for the heck of it, because they become discouraging, right? I would say, no, have a strategy. You're in business to help people lose weight. So understand where you're going, which networking events you're going to. They have to be events where people are interested in listening to those types of things, or that's what they're already looking for. That way, you're not trying to drag people or convince people to buy your services or products. So I would say preparation, and just have a strategy.
Oh, that's very helpful. Okay, so
Mhm.
and you hit on an important point that I'd like to dig a little bit deeper into
Mhm.
is, can you share a story of a time when staying true to your principles, led to a significant achievement or breakthrough for your business?
Yes, yes, yes. So I had maybe a little under 3 years ago, because I think of everything before COVID, after COVID now. So a little a little under 3 years ago, I had an opportunity to branch out a little bit in my business and go into um, a role that kept me as a coach, but it wasn't really, it, it wasn't in my realm of values, I should say, to put it nicely, right? It wasn't anything bad or anything. It was just not something that I believed in that I would go for. And so I decided to say no. And I told him that, hey, this is a little outside of my value balloon. So that's the only reason that I'm not going to go for it. And he understood and he told me, okay. And he referred me to somebody else because he felt like I was so transparent and open with what I wanted to do. And it was a good amount of money that I said no to. And he, I guess, was impressed with that, I guess I should say. And he referred me to somebody else for some business. And that business turned out to be double the business that I was going to do with him. So that was an awesome opportunity, and I was really happy for my transparency at that moment. But I believe in sticking to my values and not going outside of that. It's a very important thing for me.
You know, when you said that, it actually reminded me of a situation where one of my clients, this is many years ago,
Hmm.
worked with a global technology brand, and he was in one of their business units.
Hmm.
Um, and somehow we got in the conversation of, choosing, who you do business with, kind of like what you were
Hmm.
referring to. And I just asked him quite, in a forward manner. I said, so why did you choose to do business with me and my organization? And
Hmm.
he said, and he pondered for a second, and he goes, because you're not afraid to tell me no.
Yeah. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing?
So in today's world, when we start talking about customer experience and retention, and we're not supposed to do that, right?
Yeah,
But I think
supposedly.
it's very different when you start referring to thought leadership, innovation, creativity.
Hmm.
Uh, I think there has to be a no in there. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, not only does it have to be a no, and there's got to be some sort of, because the way I always see it is if it's a no and you say yes, then you create resentment, and your work is going to be not up to par. Like it's not going to be 100% because you're resentful in the work that you're doing, and that's going to show. So that's one of the reasons there has to be a no. But on the customer side of that, um, whether the customer knows it or not, or whether they believe it or not, they are not buying a service from you for them to have to turn around and tell you how to do that job. They want you to be an expert. They want you to know what you're doing. So if they come to you with something and you already know it's not going to work, it's going to waste their money, it's going to waste their time. So you have to be able to be like, no, Jim, that's not going to work. And this is why. Maybe they need an explanation as to why it's not going to work because obviously they're the one paying. But this is why this is not going to work. And this is what's going to work instead. Let's try this. Right? That's what they're paying you for. So if you're not doing that, you're kind of like a vending machine where they just put money in and they press a button and the chips come out, right? But that's not what you are. You're an expert and you're supposed to stand in that. So
Well, and just like you said, I mean, it feeds potentially more significant opportunities, and then
mhm.
also, like you said, and I never really thought about it that way, is you resent the work when you've compromised yourself, and that is
Yes,
so true.
yes.
Okay, so can you share a situation or on how you actually go about making sure that you can combat the dreaded imposter syndrome? What advice would you actually have for other female entrepreneurs?
Sure. So just recently I read something and I cannot remember where I read it, but it said people who are imposters don't have imposter syndrome. When people are trying to scam somebody or they don't really know what they're doing, they they don't have that syndrome, right? We only have imposter syndrome when we're unsure of ourselves, but it's not that we're unsure of what we're going to be giving or what we're going to be doing. And the way to battle that is you do it anyway. Because there's no way to pull it out of you. There's no way to take it out of you. The only way to battle it is by practice. So it's just like, taking in no's, like when you go and try to offer your services and people say no, and you can't quit just because somebody said no. You just have to take that no and look at it and see what you did wrong. It's the same thing with imposter syndrome. You go for it, you do it anyways, and you learn from that experience and you try again until it starts to, you don't, I don't know, Jim. Do you ever get over it completely, imposter syndrome? I don't think so.
Yeah, and I've seen so many different perspectives of what that
Mhm.
means. So I'll give you one, especially when you start talking about the social media world and what,
Mhm.
marketing, let's air quote gurus, say
Mhm.
that, hey, you need to be this thought leader, content creator. You need to have, this whole no, like, and trust from a
Mhm.
social validation perspective.
Mhm.
And, and that's, I mean, when I start looking at people who actually do that and become that, that's a very, very small percentage. And so other
Yeah.
people try to emulate that and try to do
Mhm.
that. And that's how I've heard some people talk about imposter syndrome. It's like you have to be who you are not really in order to be able
Mhm.
to fit into this social media mold.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think in that sense, when it comes to imposter syndrome, it's more of, you have to work backwards to where you understand that you don't need to fit into a mold and you just need to be yourself. And then people will like you more for being yourself, because as soon as you're just being who you are, you attract the people that are meant to be for you. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but it really is true, right? People could always, not, I shouldn't say always, but most of the time when you're trying to be something that you're not, it it shows. For lack of a better word, people could see it, right? So I would say in that sense then, I don't really call it imposter syndrome. I would call it more like trying to be what you're not, like, so it's the real thing. Like, so for me, imposter syndrome, I call that where you're doing something, you know how to do it, you might even be an expert, but you haven't done it in a certain field, so you feel like you shouldn't be in that room, kind of thing, right? um but you do belong in that room and you can probably help 90% of the people in that room, but you feel like you don't belong. As opposed to social media where you're trying to show this, extravagant lifestyle or be something that you're not. And I feel like more that is more just of an energy sucker than anything else, as opposed to being in a room where you just feel like you don't belong, but you definitely should be in that room. So if we're talking about the social media side, I would say just be yourself. Don't try to emulate all of that. I know that's easier said than done, because most people feel like if they don't do that, then they're not going to make it. But you are. You'll make it.
Well, and I think that's the fear, right? I have to do
Mhm.
this because that's what everybody's saying that I need to do. And so
Mhm.
therefore, yeah, and there's so many different perspectives on it because,
Yeah.
as I continue to get older, and I, try to, of course, instill this, we talked about kids and you have a 14-year-old daughter,
Mhm.
it's, and I have three,
Mhm.
I have a junior in college, a female, and then
Mhm.
a male freshman in college, and then
Mhm.
a male freshman in high school at the moment of us this recording.
Mhm.
And the different perspectives that they have and trying to get them to listen,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Instead of responding.
Yeah.
That is such a challenge.
Yeah.
Um, but you listen to all these different perspectives on even what imposter syndrome is,
Mhm.
what cherish and conquer means to them. And I
Mhm.
think to me, the depth of understanding that you gain, by listening, to people's stories and where they're coming from, can
Mhm.
be priceless. And
Mhm.
so oftentimes, you talked about pre-COVID, post-COVID, we've had to pivot our business.
Mhm.
Even that opportunity that you said it could have been a potential huge pivot, right?
Mhm.
But can you share a time? Can you share a story about a time when you've had to pivot your business strategy?
Sure. So COVID, I definitely had to pivot. Before COVID, I wasn't really doing anything online. I would post online just, once in a blue moon. I came from an 18-year hospitality background, and I pretty much just went to networking events. I did all of my marketing offline, and I got a lot of referrals from past. So people who knew me, people who've seen my work, and that's how my business was running. I had no problems. Then COVID hit. Hotels were closed for a while, anyways, and restaurants. But when they started to reopen, things were completely different because we were still technically closed. So there was no marketing, networking, there was no events, there were no conferences. So I had to get on social media, and I hated it. It took me a while because I'm one of those people who has to fully understand something before I execute. I don't process well when I'm doing while understanding. So that was like a learning curve for me where I had to understand social media and then start working on social media. And that's when I started doing podcasts as well. I love that part of it. I can do podcasts all the time, but posting was never a thing for me. I didn't take pictures when I was out. Like I didn't do those lifestyle things. Like I like to enjoy my moments. I like to be where I'm at. And I had to start doing that. And my business coach would be like, "Did you take pictures of your vacation?" I'm like, no. So that was my biggest pivot.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
I can't say that I've even done those things. I mean, you're right. That's that's a tough one to get over as far as being
Yeah,
able to now expose people to what you feel is more of the personal, especially when you start
exactly.
relaxation and
Yeah.
enjoyment. Oh, so thanks for sharing that.
Enjoying the show? After joining Marina's Army, subscribe and share the Cherish and Conquer podcast on your favorite platform. Thank you. Now, back to the show.
All right, so right now we're actually going to go through a breakthrough blitz. So we're going to ask you
Yay.
5 quick questions. You already know the answers to these, I'm sure. And we've got one final question before we wrap for the day.
Okay.
Okay, so ready for the blitz?
Mhm.
All right, here we go. So what's your favorite productivity tool or app?
So my favorite is 2 in 1. So I use Asana and Slack together, and I love it.
What's your favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
A book I read. I chill on my couch and just read a book.
If you could have dinner with any female business leader, living or deceased, who would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. I have so many, but just for the sake of this, I would probably say Oprah. Mhm.
What's your favorite quote or mantra that keeps you motivated?
Live the life you love the life you live by Bob Marley.
Hmm.
Mhm.
One piece of advice you'd give to aspiring female entrepreneurs.
Don't give up. Keep going. No matter what, just keep pushing.
Thanks for sharing that. Okay, so here's our final question.
Mhm.
So, what's the biggest misconception people have about being a female entrepreneur, and how do you address it in your own experience?
One of the biggest misconceptions, and this is female entrepreneur, female leader, anything, as long as we're at a top thing, is that when we're assertive, it's taken wrong. It's like we're being pushy or mean or something like that. That's one of the biggest misconceptions I see. And the way I try to curve that, I can't say I've eliminated it in my business, but the way I try to curve that is by giving a disclaimer at the top. I am, I'm very straightforward. I come in, I do what I have to do and leave. So don't worry. I'm not trying to be mean. I'm not trying to be, a bad word. I'm just in business mode right now.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And I've oftentimes, like you're saying, have
Hmm.
used some type of disclaimer in a lot of different ways before,
Hmm.
I go into whatever I need to actually explain or, give us a
Uh-huh.
coaching point or a feedback point.
Hmm.
I think that's great advice for a lot of us. Stephanie Coradin, fantastic conversation today. Could you please let us know how we can actually get in touch with you?
Sure. Thank you for that, Jim. You can reach me at demboinc.com, and that's DEMBOINC.com. And on social media, my name is Stephanie_Z Coradin everywhere, so you can reach me that way as well.
Stephanie Coradin, thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom, and we wish you the very best.
Thank you so much for having me, Jim.
Thanks for tuning into the Cherish and Conquer podcast from Marina. Join our community of trailblazing women at community.marina.ai and get access to exclusive resources, checklists, and guides. If you found value in today's episode, please rate, review, subscribe, and share it across your social platforms. See you soon, and remember, barriers are for breaking.